The anonymous video arrived exactly 12 hours before my 30th birthday party. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number containing footage that shattered everything I believed about my family. There was my sister Melody, my supposedly supportive twin, standing in our family kitchen just 3 days earlier, laughing with our parents about how pathetic my life had become. But the real knife to my heart came when she opened her laptop and showed them bank statements, my bank statements, proving she had been systematically draining my inheritance fund for 2 years while playing the loving sister role perfectly. Before we dive into this family betrayal story that changed my entire world, I need to know, where are you watching from tonight? If this kind of family drama resonates with you, smash that like button because trust me, this revenge story gets wild. And definitely subscribe because you will not believe how this ends. Ready to see how sometimes the people closest to you can be your biggest enemies? The video was just the beginning. After canceling my birthday party with a simple text saying, "Family emergency," I spent the entire night diving deep into what Melody had actually been doing. The anonymous sender had included more than just that kitchen conversation. They had sent me 2 years' worth of financial records, screenshots of text conversations, and even audio recordings that painted a picture so disturbing I had to pause multiple times just to process it all. Melody had not just been stealing from my inheritance fund. She had been orchestrating an elaborate financial manipulation scheme that involved our parents, our younger brother Marcus, and even our grandmother's estate planning. The inheritance fund our grandfather had left specifically for my education and future business ventures had been slowly drained through a series of emergency loans that Melody had convinced our parents I had approved. According to the documents, I had supposedly requested these funds for various failed business attempts, gambling debts, and even drug rehabilitation programs I had never attended. The most sickening part was how methodical she had been. Every withdrawal was accompanied by forged emails from my account, fake documentation of my supposed financial irresponsibility, and carefully crafted stories about my mental health struggles that she had been feeding to our family for months. She had created an entire narrative where I was the unstable, financially reckless daughter who could not be trusted with money while positioning herself as the responsible twin who was trying to protect the family assets from my destructive behavior. But the financial fraud was only part of the story. The recordings revealed something even more sinister. Melody had been actively sabotaging my career opportunities. She had been calling potential employers, pretending to be a concerned former colleague sharing fabricated stories about my work ethic and reliability. 3 job opportunities that I thought had simply not worked out had actually been destroyed by her interference. She had even gone so far as to create fake social media accounts to leave negative reviews about the consulting services I had been trying to build. The contempt in her voice as she described these actions to our parents was what hurt the most. She called me naive, pathetic, and too trusting for my own good. Our mother had laughed when Melody said I would probably never figure out what was happening because I had always been the slower twin. Our father had added that maybe this was better for everyone since I had never shown the same level of ambition or intelligence that Melody possessed. What made this betrayal even more devastating was the realization that this favoritism had been going on our entire lives, but I had been too blind to see it. Every time I had shared an achievement with my family, Melody had found a way to diminish it or redirect attention to her own accomplishments. Every time I had faced a setback, she had been there offering support while secretly ensuring that the setbacks continued. She had been playing the long game, systematically isolating me from family resources while building herself up as the golden child. The anonymous sender had also included evidence that Melody had been intercepting mail and phone calls intended for me. important documents about the inheritance, invitations to family financial planning meetings, and even birthday cards with money from distant relatives had all been redirected to her. She had created a parallel version of my life where I was failing and irresponsible while living off the resources that were rightfully mine. As I sat in my apartment reading through everything, I realized that my entire relationship with my family had been built on lies that Melody had carefully constructed. Every conversation, every family dinner, every piece of advice they had given me had been based on false information she had provided. They genuinely believed I was the problem child because she had spent years building that narrative with methodical precision. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Melody directly or calling our parents, I decided to attend the weekly family brunch that happened every Sunday at our childhood home. I wanted to see this performance up close now that I knew what was really happening. I wanted to watch Melody play her role while I gathered more evidence and planned my response. Walking into that familiar kitchen felt like entering a completely different world. Suddenly, every interaction took on new meaning. When my mother hugged me and asked how I was doing, I could hear the underlying concern about my supposed instability. When my father made a casual comment about hoping I was being more responsible with money lately, I understood that he was referencing problems I had never actually had. And when Melody squeezed my shoulder and said she was proud of how well I was handling my challenges, I had to use every ounce of self-control not to scream. But I played along. I smiled and nodded and acted like the struggling daughter they all believed I was. Meanwhile, I was recording everything on my phone and taking mental notes about how seamlessly Melody wove her lies into casual conversation. She mentioned being worried about a job interview I had supposedly failed because of my attitude issues. She brought up a therapy session I had never attended where I had allegedly had a breakdown about my jealousy toward her success. She even managed to work in a story about how I had asked her to help me manage my finances because I could not trust myself with money. What struck me most was how natural it all seemed to everyone else. This was not a recent development. This was a well-established family dynamic where Melody was the responsible daughter, and I was the one who needed constant support and guidance. They had been living in this false reality for so long that questioning it probably never occurred to them. During brunch, I excused myself to use the bathroom and instead slipped into my father's home office. I knew he kept important family documents in his filing cabinet, and I needed to see exactly how deep this fraud went. What I found was worse than I had imagined. There were legal documents showing that my inheritance had been placed in a trust with Melody as the primary trustee due to concerns about my financial stability. There were medical records that had been fabricated showing a history of mental health treatments I had never received. There were even character references that Melody had written herself, supposedly from my former employers and friends, describing my unreliable behavior and poor judgment. She had not just stolen my money, she had stolen my entire identity and reputation within my own family. Every important decision about my future was being made based on lies she had created. My parents had even been considering having me declared financially incompetent so they could take complete control of any assets or opportunities that came my way. When I returned to the kitchen, I made my first move. I casually mentioned that I had been thinking about starting a new business venture and asked if anyone knew why I had never received the inheritance money that Grandpa had specifically left for that purpose. The room went completely silent. My parents exchanged glances with Melody, and I could see her calculating how to respond. Melody smoothly explained that the money had been moved into a managed account for my protection after I had requested help with my financial planning. She said I had been concerned about my impulse spending and had asked her to help me create a more structured approach to accessing those funds. She delivered this lie with such conviction that I almost doubted my own memory for a moment. But then I played my trump card. I pulled out my phone and said I had been going through my old emails and could not find any record of requesting that kind of help. I asked if she might have any of the documentation about when I had made that request, since my memory had been a bit foggy lately about financial matters. The panic in her eyes was unmistakable, even though she kept her voice steady. She said she would have to check her records at home and get back to me. Our parents jumped in to reassure me that everything had been handled properly and that I should not worry about the details since Melody had everything under control. That was the moment I knew for certain that they were all complicit in this deception, whether knowingly or not. They were so invested in the narrative of my instability that they could not even consider the possibility that Melody might be lying. The golden child could do no wrong, and the problem child could never be trusted to understand complex financial matters. The anonymous sender reached out again that evening with an even more shocking revelation. They were not just some random person who had stumbled across evidence of Melody's crimes. They were Marcus, my younger brother, and he had been documenting everything for months, waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. Marcus had always been the quiet observer in our family, and apparently he had been watching Melody's manipulation tactics much more carefully than anyone realized. He had started recording conversations and gathering evidence when he noticed discrepancies in family stories about my behavior versus what he had personally witnessed. Unlike our parents, Marcus had never fully bought into the narrative that I was the irresponsible twin. Our video call that night was both heartbreaking and empowering. Marcus explained that he had tried to bring up inconsistencies with our parents before, but they had dismissed his concerns as teenage confusion or misremembering. Melody had been so successful at establishing herself as the family truth teller that questioning her version of events was essentially seen as disloyalty. Marcus had been building his evidence collection systematically. He had recordings of Melody coaching our parents on what to say to me during difficult conversations. He had screenshots of her fake social media accounts that she used to sabotage my professional reputation. He had even managed to access some of her personal files when she left her laptop open during a family gathering, discovering drafts of emails she planned to send to my potential employers and business contacts. But the most damaging evidence Marcus had gathered was proof that Melody had been planning to take this fraud even further. She had been researching legal guardianship procedures and had already consulted with a lawyer about having me declared mentally incompetent. Her long-term plan was to gain complete control over my finances and life decisions by building such a convincing case of my instability that the courts would grant her legal authority over my affairs. Marcus had also discovered that our parents were not just passive victims of Melody's manipulation. They were actively benefiting from it. Some of the money stolen from my inheritance had been used to pay for improvements to their house, cover Marcus's college expenses, and even fund a vacation they had taken the previous year. They might have genuinely believed the stories about my instability, but they had also been financially motivated to continue believing them rather than investigating too closely. Together, Marcus and I developed a strategy that would expose everything in the most effective way possible. We could not simply confront Melody or our parents with evidence because they had too much invested in maintaining their version of reality. We needed to create a situation where the truth would be undeniable and where there would be consequences serious enough to prevent future manipulation. Marcus had connections through his college internship at a legal aid clinic, and he helped me connect with attorneys who specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse cases. Even though I was not elderly, the systematic manipulation of family members and financial resources fell under similar legal frameworks. We also reached out to financial institutions to report the unauthorized access to my accounts and the forged documents that had been used to redirect my inheritance. But we knew that legal consequences would not be enough to repair the family relationships that had been damaged by years of lies. We needed our parents to understand not just what Melody had done, but how their favoritism and willingness to believe the worst about me had enabled this abuse. We needed them to confront their own role in perpetuating a family dynamic that had allowed one daughter to systematically destroy the other. The breakthrough came when Marcus discovered that Melody had been recording her own conversations with family members, probably as a way to keep track of her lies and maintain consistency in her stories. She had hours of audio files stored on her computer, including conversations where she explicitly discussed her manipulation tactics and expressed contempt for the rest of the family's intelligence. In one particularly damning recording, Melody talked about how easy it had been to convince our parents that I was unstable because they had always been slightly uncomfortable with the fact that I was more independent and questioning than she was. She had simply played into their preference for the daughter who was more compliant and eager to please. She laughed about how our father especially had never respected women who challenged his opinions, so portraying me as emotionally unstable had been much more effective than trying to compete with me on merit. These recordings were the missing piece we needed. They showed not just the fraud and manipulation, but the deliberate psychological abuse that had been designed to isolate me from family support while enriching Melody both financially and socially. They proved that this was not just financial crime, it was systematic emotional and psychological warfare designed to destroy my sense of reality and self-worth. Armed with overwhelming evidence and a solid legal strategy, Marcus and I decided to bring in our cousin Elena, who worked in corporate investigations. We thought having a family member with professional expertise would strengthen our case and provide another witness to Melody's confession. Elena had always been close to our family, often joining holiday gatherings and family vacations. She seemed like the perfect ally, someone who knew the family dynamics but had the professional skills to help us handle this situation properly. Elena listened to everything with apparent shock and anger. She reviewed all the evidence Marcus had collected, examined the financial documents, and listened to the recordings of Melody's manipulative conversations. She promised to help us coordinate with law enforcement and said she could use her professional contacts to ensure the case was handled properly. We felt like we finally had the adult support and expertise we needed to bring justice to this situation. For 2 weeks, Elena worked with us to refine our evidence and plan our approach. She helped us organize the documentation in a way that would be most compelling to both legal authorities and our family members. She even suggested ways to present the information that would minimize the emotional trauma for our parents while still ensuring they understood the full scope of what had happened. But then, everything fell apart in the most devastating way possible. During what was supposed to be our final planning meeting before confronting Melody and our parents, Elena's phone rang. She stepped out to take the call, leaving her laptop open on the table. Marcus and I were reviewing some final details when a message notification popped up on her screen. What we saw made our blood run cold. The message was from Melody, and it was clearly part of an ongoing conversation. Elena had not just been helping us, she had been reporting everything back to Melody from the very beginning. The message thread showed weeks of detailed updates about our investigation, our evidence, and our planned approach. Melody had been staying one step ahead of us because Elena had been feeding her information about every move we made. But the betrayal went even deeper than simple information sharing. Elena and Melody had been working together to build an even more elaborate frame job. While we thought Elena was helping us prepare evidence against Melody, she had actually been helping Melody prepare counter-evidence against us. They had been creating documentation that would make it appear that Marcus and I were the ones engaged in fraud and manipulation, attempting to steal from the family inheritance through false accusations and fabricated evidence. The messages revealed that Elena had been recording our conversations during our planning sessions. She had been documenting our investigation techniques and our emotional responses to use as evidence that we were conducting a vindictive campaign against Melody. They had even prepared statements from family members who would testify that Marcus and I had always been jealous of Melody's success and had made previous unfounded accusations against her. When Elena returned to the room, Marcus and I confronted her about what we had seen. Instead of denying it or showing shame, she calmly closed her laptop and explained that she had been protecting the family from what she called our destructive obsession with bringing down Melody. She said that Melody had reached out to her weeks ago concerned that Marcus and I were planning to make false accusations that would tear the family apart. Elena claimed that after reviewing our evidence, she had concluded that we had either fabricated everything or had severely misinterpreted innocent family interactions. She said the recordings could be explained as normal family conversations taken out of context and that the financial irregularities were simply the result of legitimate family financial planning that we had been excluded from due to our own irresponsible behavior. But the most crushing part of her betrayal was when she revealed that she had never really believed us to begin with. She admitted that she had agreed to help us because Melody had asked her to monitor our investigation and report back. Elena had been convinced from the start that Melody was the victim of our jealousy and manipulation, and everything we had shown her had been filtered through that assumption. Even worse, Elena revealed that this intervention had been planned from the moment Marcus first reached out to me with evidence. Melody had known that Marcus was gathering information against her, and she had been working with Elena to turn our own investigation into proof of our instability and vindictiveness. They had been counting on us to dig deeper and become more emotionally invested so that when they finally revealed their counter-narrative, our passionate advocacy for our position would look like obsessive delusion. The setup was sophisticated and cruel. Elena had encouraged us to be more aggressive in our evidence gathering, knowing that it would make us look more unhinged when they eventually discredited us. She had suggested strategies that would actually weaken our legal position while appearing to strengthen it. She had even recommended that we record certain conversations that could later be used to demonstrate our supposed vindictive intent. As Elena laid out how thoroughly they had manipulated our investigation, I realized that Melody's fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. This was a family culture where manipulation and emotional abuse were so normalized that multiple people could participate in elaborate deception campaigns without seeing anything wrong with their behavior. Elena genuinely believed she was protecting the family by helping to discredit legitimate accusations of financial fraud and psychological abuse. Marcus and I left that meeting feeling more isolated and betrayed than ever. Not only had we lost our main ally, but we now knew that our every move had been anticipated and countered. Melody and Elena had been building a case against us while we thought we were building a case against them. We had walked directly into a trap that had been set from the very beginning. Just when everything seemed hopeless, salvation came from the most unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Williams, the family lawyer who had been handling our grandfather's estate, contacted me directly. She had received some concerning information and wanted to meet privately to discuss irregularities she had discovered in the inheritance distribution. Dr. Williams had been growing suspicious about the management of my inheritance for several months. As the lawyer who had originally drafted our grandfather's will, she knew exactly what his intentions had been regarding my education and business fund. When she had been contacted by someone claiming to represent my interests in redirecting those funds, something had felt wrong about the paperwork and the explanations provided. Her investigation had led her to discover not just the unauthorized access to my inheritance, but a pattern of financial irregularities affecting several of her elderly clients. Melody had been using her position as a trusted family member to gain access to estate planning information, which she then used to manipulate inheritance distributions for other families as well. What we had thought was a personal family betrayal was actually part of a larger financial fraud operation. Dr. Williams had been quietly building a case with law enforcement for weeks, gathering evidence from multiple families who had been victimized by similar schemes. She had recordings of conversations where Melody had posed as various family members to obtain confidential financial information. She had documentation showing how Melody had been creating fake emergencies and mental health crises for multiple family members to justify redirecting their inheritances into accounts she controlled. But most importantly, Dr. Williams had something we had never been able to obtain: independent verification of our grandfather's actual intentions. She had detailed notes from their conversations where he had specifically expressed concerns about family favoritism and had structured my inheritance to protect it from exactly the kind of manipulation that had occurred. He had even included provisions that would invalidate the inheritance if there was evidence of family coercion or fraud in its management. Working with Dr. Williams changed everything about our approach. Instead of trying to convince our family members to believe us over Melody, we now had legal authority and institutional power behind our case. Dr. Williams could freeze all accounts related to the inheritance pending investigation. She could subpoena financial records that had been hidden from us. Most importantly, she could initiate legal proceedings that would force everyone involved to respond to official accusations rather than family drama. The investigation moved quickly once it had proper legal backing. Financial institutions were required to provide complete records of all transactions. Phone companies produced call logs showing the fraudulent communications. Even Elena's recorded conversations with us became evidence of obstruction of justice rather than proof of our instability. But Dr. Williams also provided something even more valuable than legal vindication. She gave us insight into our grandfather's real feelings about our family dynamics. Through her notes and recordings of their planning sessions, we learned that he had been deeply concerned about the favoritism our parents showed toward Melody. He had specifically structured the inheritances to try to balance what he saw as unfair treatment that had been going on for years. Our grandfather had actually tried to address the family favoritism during his lifetime, but his concerns had been dismissed by our parents as the confused worries of an aging man. Williams had copies of letters he had written to our parents expressing his disappointment in how they were handling the relationships between their children. He had seen exactly what Marcus and I had experienced, but his attempts to intervene had been ignored or minimized. Learning about our grandfather's perspective was both validating and heartbreaking. It confirmed that the family dynamics we had experienced were real and damaging. But it also showed us that there had been someone in our family who understood and cared about fairness and truth. His inheritance structure had been his final attempt to protect me from exactly what had ended up happening. Dr. Williams also connected us with other family members who had been victimized by similar schemes. We discovered that Melody had been running versions of this fraud on cousins and extended family members for years. The pattern was always the same: identify the family member with the least social power, create a narrative about their instability or irresponsibility, then redirect their resources while positioning herself as the responsible caretaker. One particularly powerful piece of evidence came from our cousin David, who had been convinced by Melody to sign over power of attorney during a brief period when he was struggling with depression. Melody had used that authority to redirect his inheritance from our uncle's estate, supposedly to protect it from his poor decision-making. David had spent years believing he had lost his inheritance due to his own mistakes, never knowing that Melody had systematically stolen it while he was at his most vulnerable. With Dr. Williams coordinating everything, we were able to build a comprehensive case that showed not just individual instances of fraud, but a deliberate pattern of predatory behavior targeting vulnerable family members. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, backed by institutional authority that even our parents could not dismiss as family drama or misunderstanding. The confrontation happened in Dr. Williams' office, not in our family kitchen. Our parents, Melody and Elena, were all summoned for what they thought was a routine estate planning meeting. Marcus and I were there as witnesses, along with a detective who specialized in family financial crimes and a representative from the district attorney's office. When Dr. Williams began presenting the evidence, the room dynamics shifted immediately. This was not angry siblings making accusations. This was legal authority presenting documented proof of systematic fraud. Our parents could not dismiss or minimize what they were hearing because it was coming from their trusted family lawyer and backed by law enforcement. Melody's reaction was perhaps the most telling part of the entire experience. Instead of showing shock or trying to defend herself, she immediately began calculating damage control. She tried to negotiate with the prosecutor offering to return some of the money in exchange for reduced charges. She attempted to shift blame to Elena, claiming she had been manipulated into participating in schemes she did not fully understand. But the evidence was too comprehensive for any of her usual manipulation tactics to work. The recordings, the financial documents, the pattern of fraud across multiple families, everything painted a clear picture of deliberate, calculated criminal behavior. More importantly, everything was now being evaluated by people who had no emotional investment in family relationships or existing narratives about anyone's character. Elena's collapse was even more dramatic. When confronted with evidence of her role in obstructing our investigation and helping to build fraudulent counter cases, she seemed genuinely surprised that her actions might be considered criminal rather than protective. She had been so convinced that she was helping to prevent family drama that she had not considered the legal implications of her interference with a fraud investigation. Our parents' response was complex and painful to witness. The financial evidence was undeniable, but accepting it meant acknowledging that they had been completely wrong about their daughters for years. It meant confronting their own role in enabling abuse and recognizing how their favoritism had created conditions where this fraud could flourish. My mother's breakdown was particularly difficult to watch. She kept repeating that she had been trying to protect me by supporting Melody's management of my finances. She had genuinely believed that I needed extra support and guidance, and she had thought Melody's intervention was loving sisterly care. Accepting that it was actually predatory manipulation meant questioning every family interaction and decision of the past several years. My father struggled with the challenge to his authority and judgment. He had prided himself on being the family decision maker, and learning that his decisions had been based on elaborate lies was devastating to his sense of competence and control. He alternated between anger at being deceived and anger at Marcus and me for exposing the deception. The legal consequences were swift and appropriate. Melody was charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Elena faced charges related to obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Both would face significant prison time and financial restitution requirements. All stolen funds were frozen pending complete accounting and return to victims. But the personal consequences were even more significant for our family healing. Dr. Williams had built-in therapeutic support as part of the legal resolution process. Our parents were required to participate in family counseling to address the favoritism and manipulation patterns that had enabled this abuse. Marcus and I were connected with therapists who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse recovery. The most powerful part of the healing process was when other family members began reaching out to share their own experiences with Melody's manipulation. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends all had stories about times when Melody had tried to manipulate family resources or relationships in ways they had dismissed as personality quirks, rather than recognizing as predatory behavior. What emerged was a clearer picture of how family systems can enable abuse when there is not enough accountability or willingness to question golden child dynamics. Our extended family began having conversations about favoritism, resource distribution, and power imbalances that should have happened years earlier. Marcus and I found ourselves becoming advocates for other families dealing with similar situations. Dr. Williams connected us with support groups and legal organizations working on family financial abuse cases. We discovered that what we had experienced was far more common than we had realized, and that many families struggle with these dynamics without ever getting proper support or resolution. The most unexpected gift of this entire experience was the relationship Marcus and I developed with Dr. Williams and some of the other families we met through the legal process. We found ourselves creating chosen family relationships with people who understood the complexity of family trauma and the importance of accountability and honesty in relationships. 1 year later, Marcus and I hosted our own holiday gathering for this chosen family of people who had supported us through crisis and recovery. It included Dr. Williams, David, and several other cousins who had been victimized by Melody, our therapists and new friends we had met through support groups. The gathering felt more genuinely loving and supportive than any family event we had experienced in years. Our relationship with our parents remains complicated but is slowly improving through continued therapy and accountability work. They are learning to recognize their role in enabling abuse and are working to rebuild trust through changed behavior rather than just apologies. It is difficult work, but it feels honest in a way our family relationships never had before. As I reflect on this journey from betrayal to justice to healing, I keep thinking about how family trauma often stays hidden because we are taught to prioritize loyalty over truth. But real family love actually requires truth-telling and accountability. The people who truly care about us want us to thrive, not just comply with their preferred version of reality. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own truth? Have you experienced situations where speaking up about abuse or manipulation felt impossible because of family pressure? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories matter and they help other people feel less alone with these difficult experiences. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content about family justice and healing from betrayal. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they are not crazy, that their experiences matter, and that accountability is possible even in the most complicated family situations. Thank you for witnessing this journey with me. Remember that choosing truth over comfort is one of the most loving things we can do for ourselves and our families, even when it feels impossible in the moment. Sometimes the family we choose becomes more genuine and supportive than the family we were born into, and that is perfectly okay.